This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
The presidency has denied that it stabilised the naira by spending 8 billion naira as claimed by Economist Bismark Rewane. Mr. Rewane made the claims during the television interview while speaking about the foreign exchange market where the dollar has stabilised and exchanged for 1,500 naira. Joining the conversation this morning is Adegboyega Adebajo, who is an economist. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Good morning, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
I'm very interested in hearing what you make of this exchange.
Well, it's very interesting, and I wonder if the controversy isn't as to what exactly the amount is that has been spent defending the naira. There's no doubt about it. I think if the CBN hadn't stepped in, if the CBN hadn't taken the measures they have taken in the past 1.5 years, so to say, we would have seen the naira much lower than it is now presently. We all want a stronger naira anyway, and whether we like it or not, no country actually allows its currency to flow without some form of intervention. So if that intervention is in terms of a currency defense, well, that's the core mandate that any apex bank will have to do. They all have a target in terms of what kind of exchange rate works best for the different indices of the economy. So I guess that's what the central bank is trying to do. But as to whether it's 8 billion or not, that remains to be seen. And when that statement was made, there was reference to the fact that the federal government has issued bonds in US dollars to the tune of about 4 billion, and that's documented, that's there. But in terms of the other 4 billion, how that has come about and what makes it 8 billion, I wouldn't say for certain that I know exactly where it comes from.
So, Mr. Adebajo, how important is it for the CBN to clarify this? And I ask it because part of the logic for the reforms we saw with the exchange rate was really that it would encourage more investors, whether it was by foreign direct investment or portfolio investment, whatever the case, that the returns would be so much better. So if this claim, if you like, let's call it a claim by Mr. Rewane, has any sort of validity, what does it mean for the public image, and how important is it for the CBN itself to clarify?
Well, okay, so first of all, because Nabila, you've asked the question in two ways. In terms of clarification, it's always good to have an official statement. And I believe that's why you have two types of meetings coming out of the CBN, the MPC meeting and the Bankers Committee meeting. And you realize that usually after both meetings, there's some kind of briefing to the press to talk about the highlights of the discussions over there. So that's key. And if I were a foreign investor, I'll be looking at, I'll put a lot of weight on what someone like Mr. Rewane says, because his observations and his comments have been regular and they're well researched. But I would also want to hear an official statement from an official institution where the policy that drives both exchange rate, inflation, and cost of borrowing comes out of. Now, back to the second part of your question. It's imperative that regardless of what is going to go on with the naira, the central bank needs to be prepared to keep it at its target rate. In planning for the economy ahead, the CBN will typically have a target rate, a target exchange rate, which they expect the naira to float around. And it's easy for them to say, well, if this is a target, if we have to intervene in the market by making sure we either provide the naira, the dollars that people need, so demand does not outstrip supply and therefore lead to a high price in the unofficial market, they will do so. a lot has happened in the past couple of weeks. We've had the indices from rebasing the CPI. Okay, it wasn't exactly the GDP that was rebased; it was the consumer price index, where different items in the basket were changed, and that's brought about a new measure for inflation. We're seeing. We're aware that oil output in terms of barrel production has increased, and therefore the reserves should be a lot more buoyed up by now. And so all these things actually come into play. So it may not be so much about just defending the naira. There's certain parameters that indicate that the naira should at least be relatively stable. And that's the way I see it right now.
And if we go by those parameters, right, and it's not just about the reforms, everything from the conversations around FPI, FDI, remittances from the diaspora community, all of these things have seen an increase over the course of a year. And I remember when the administration came in, they'd said that, look, the naira is undervalued. It was a statement that was also categorically made by the CBN governor. There's still an insistence that even at 1,500, we do have an undervalued currency. So when you consider all of these things, I wonder if it's still plausible or whether it does throw at least some sort of question into Mr. Rewane's assessment of the situation.
Someone said that the day two economists agree, and that two economists that would typically have conflicting positions, the day they agree, then the discipline of economics is dead. And I say that because the valuation of whatever asset, and that really applies also to a currency, can sometimes be actually relative, and it can be subjective. The central bank or the black market may come up with its own figures or its own exchange rate. But if you had dollars to sell and I had the naira to buy the dollars, the rate we hear from the central bank or the official market will be a guide to both of us. At the end of the day, a fair value is where you and I agree, where we have a willing buyer and a willing seller. And that's why the aspect different people come and talk about different percentages of undervaluation. Some people will take certain methods of valuation and from there conclude. Some people may take another method and have their conclusions to that. One thing is clear, we all want a stronger naira. There's a feeling that there was a lot that was imperfect about the market and led to the rapid depreciation of the naira last year.
Right.
And therefore, that is why there is a perception of undervaluation. One thing I know Mr. Rewane has done is to look at the purchasing power parity, which is, for instance, what I would say, what's the cost of a burger in the United States? I take a market where the population and the demand is there, and I look at what's the cost of a burger, let's say in Lagos, and then I use those prices. I divide those prices to have a fair idea of what purchasing power parity. Now, I'm a huge fan of purchasing power parity because at the end of the day, those exchange rates mean nothing. It's a matter of what's in my pocket and what it can actually get me.
Mm-hmm.
So a trader, it's a matter of if he's got so much dollars, what can he buy over there and bring back over here? So with a purchasing power parity analysis, it comes to about 1,100 naira per dollar. And this is why there is that conclusion that the naira is undervalued right now.
Right.
And so that's why we've arrived at that.
Well, Mr. Adeboyega, thank you very much for your time and your expertise on this conversation. Adeboyega Adebajo is an economist who joined us this morning to speak on the federal government's denial that it spent $8 billion to defend the naira, a claim that was made by another economist, Bismark Rewane. You're still on to Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos, your Beyond the News station. We urge you to stay tuned. Our conversations continue in just a moment.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.